Engagement and conservation. So we will be more talking about things not directly related with the species itself and the habitat itself. And we would like to start with Mr. Adrian Whitfield. And then we will also have presentations from our Czech colleagues and Austrian colleagues. So the floor is yours. Which one? Maybe this one. Okay.
Okay. Shall I take this one? Thank you. Can I have my presentation, please? Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Now for something slightly different, to talk about the legal framework and the effects on reintroductions. I'd like to thank Max for giving a bit of an introduction about some of the legal problems that are actually faced by trying to do reintroductions and trying to do new things when the legislation is rather old and maybe is not quite suitable for what you now need to do. What I'm going to do is start by talking about the legislation that you're probably familiar with, that's been in place for the last 30 years, and also to talk about butterfly monitoring, which is one of the things that's very important to us in Butterfly Conservation Europe. And then I'm going to talk about the last 5 years where the two have started to merge together. And also, the legislation is changing very fast. So there are some changes to the legislation which are very recent, which you might not be familiar with. And that front page is just to prove that I do know what an Apollo butterfly looks like, even though I'm a policy person, because that's a photograph I took in June this year. Just to give me some credibility with the audience. So if we start with the EU Habitats Directive, which has been in place since 1992 and has been the main legal framework for the conservation of habitats and species. This was the directive that established the Natura 2000 network, and Annex 4 of the directive lists more than 400 species which should be strictly protected, including Panassius Apollo and the clouded Apollo as well. And there is a feedback mechanism to make sure that the directive works properly, which is the Article 17 reports, where member states have to report on the implementation of the directive every 6 years. And in addition to the directive, in 2010, the EU funded the European Red List of Butterflies. And on that list, almost 120 of the 420 European species are listed as being threatened or near threatened, including the Panassius Apollo and Mycenomi. And as well as having the directive itself, since 1992, there has been the LIFE programme, which has been the EU funding instrument for environment and climate action, and the Nature and Biodiversity sub-programme of that aims to protect and restore European nature and to halt and reverse biodiversity loss. So the legislation has been in place for 30 years, and there is a mechanism in place for 30 years to help member states to implement that legislation. Moving on to look at butterfly monitoring schemes, the first scheme was set up way back in 1976 in the UK. And the idea has grown since then. And by 2000, there were 5 butterfly monitoring schemes in Europe, in the UK, in the Netherlands, in the Flanders region of Belgium, in Catalonia in Spain. So we have 2 Catalans with us today, which is very good. And in Finland. And then by 2004, in 2004, Butterfly Conservation Europe was formed as an NGO based in the Netherlands. And it was formed by Butterfly Conservation in the UK, joining together with Butterfly Conservation in the Netherlands to try and get more interchange of ideas across different European countries. And by 2016, the European Butterfly Monitoring Schemes, the European Butterfly Monitoring Scheme was formed to bring together the butterfly monitoring data into a single database, because different countries were collecting their data on different databases. Many of the butterflies, of course, don't know about national boundaries, so you want to be able to look at all of the data across Europe. Now, by 2018, there were butterfly monitoring schemes in 18 countries. So the idea has grown, it's caught on, but that's only 18 countries out of an EU 27. And one of the key features here is that each country had set up its own butterfly monitoring scheme using its own resources. There was no EU funding. There was nothing done on an EU basis. The scheme, the main methodology for butterfly monitoring that's being used is the transect methodology. So it's a transect system using citizen science for monitoring purposes, but also combined with having national experts who can help to run the system, to run the database, to check the results, to make sure that people aren't sending in results that are nonsense or make mistakes. But it's generally being run as a citizen science monitoring system. And that's a picture of my wife. She and I walk a transect which is about 5 kilometres from where we live, and we've been walking that transect for the last 4 years. So that's what we do. So why are butterflies important for EU policy making? Some of these factors have already been mentioned today. Firstly, that they're declining faster than vertebrates and plants. They respond rapidly to changes in habitat condition and to climate. The scientists really have quite a good knowledge about butterfly ecology, certainly better than we have for a lot of other invertebrates. Butterflies are better studied and better understood than most of the other invertebrates. They do capture the public imagination, including through citizen science. It's very difficult to get people interested in wasps, and some people don't want to be interested in spiders. So butterflies are a bit easier to get the public to work for. And they are, in particular, the umbrella species for all of the other pollinators. If you get the habitat right for the butterflies, it's probably going to be right for just about everything else that's an invertebrate. One of the developments that's come through from having the European database and from having Butterfly Conservation Europe working on it is to start to produce an indicator. So not just looking at single species, and each species does different things, but to actually produce an indicator that can be used for policy purposes, where you're looking at all of the species that are found in grasslands, for instance. So this butterfly indicator was first developed in 2005 using data for 17 butterfly species, and it shows a 39% decline across that time interval. And this is the sort of data that you can talk to the Commission about. This is the sort of data you can talk to the politicians about, because you've got the robust data covering a range of species, and that's what will start to influence them at a policy level. The causes of decline there are many different causes of decline, but I think the two that are most affected, caused by humans, and this is in very general terms, is agricultural intensification and pesticide use in northern and western Europe, and then agricultural abandonment in southern and eastern Europe, with grassland going to scrub and to trees. It's a bit of a generalization there, but those are the really two big drivers that are forcing the change. The EU, so the thing that's happened then over the last, the thing that's happened over the last 30 years is you've had these two developments. You've got the legislation, the Habitats Directive is from the top down. You've got butterfly monitoring schemes which have grown from the bottom up on a regional or a national basis, and the two are completely separate. They've been completely independent of each other. There's been no funding that's gone across. There's no ideas. No funding has come across from the EU to help butterfly monitoring, and butterfly monitoring hasn't really affected what's happened in terms of policy until about 5 or 6 years ago, when we started to see some changes coming through. And this started with the EU Pollinators Initiative in 2018, which focused EU policy and funding on reversing the decline of pollinators, which has been well established, including trying to get the Habitats Directive Article 17 reports to work a bit better, and funding for more life projects. And that initiative from the EU recognised that butterflies were the only pollinators that were being systematically monitored at national and regional level, but only in 15 member states. So, yeah, the system's good, but it's only covering half of Europe. And the EU Pollinators Initiative, while it was very useful, had no legal force to make member states take any action. The EU then decided to fund the ABLE project, Assessing Butterflies in Europe, and this was funded by the EU from 2018 to 2020, and it established 10 new butterfly monitoring schemes: Portugal, Italy, Austria, Czechia, Poland, Hungary, Croatia, Malta, Bulgaria, and Cyprus. So all of the countries shown there in yellow have had new butterfly monitoring schemes set up in the last few years, funded by the EU. The purple countries shown in purple are the countries that already had schemes developed. And the project also paid for the development of improved butterfly indicators. So as well as the grassland indicator that was already existed, we started to develop indicators for grasslands, meadows, forests, and urban areas, and to look at the impact of climate change. So it's been very useful to have that EU funding to extend butterfly monitoring schemes across Europe. The project that has followed on from that, which is running at the moment, is the SPRING project, Strengthening Pollinator Recovery Through Indicators and Monitoring. And that's funded by the EU from 2021 to 2023, so we're right in the middle of that project now. And that has continued from the ABLE project, so it's establishing 5 butterfly monitoring schemes in Denmark, Greece, Slovakia, Latvia, and Romania, which will mean that every country in Europe has a butterfly monitoring scheme. They might be rather new and they might be rather small and they need to grow, but at least we've got them started. But it's also, the SPRING project is also extending beyond butterflies to pilot the rollout of a European pollinator monitoring programme called EU POMS, to look at developing a systematic methodology for monitoring moths, hoverflies, bees, and bumblebees. And there's some real problems associated with achieving that. For example, you will be familiar with European red lists for endangered species. Well, they are currently producing a European red list of taxonomists, because there are so few professionals in Europe who can actually identify hoverflies and bumblebees that they've actually gathering a list of all those experts from across Europe, because there are just so few people who can identify them, and they want to find out where the gaps are in that across Europe. So I always find it amusing, a European red list of taxonomists, because they're a rare subspecies. And now you're looking at other methods, so you're looking at things like pan traps to do that monitoring. The EU has then moved on to producing the Biodiversity Strategy for 2030. This was published in May 2020, and its aims were to increase protected areas to 30% of EU land and sea, with strict protection for 10%, to start to achieve ecosystem recovery, reverse the decline in wild pollinators, reduce the use of pesticides by 50%, and there's an ambitious target for you. And in March this year, the EU held a workshop for member states where the member states were called upon to put forward plans to implement the strategy for butterflies. That was a pledges event. And as a result of that event, Julia, who's here today, got in touch with Butterfly Conservation Europe, and that's why I'm here today. So, again, another development from the EU as a strategy. So very high level. But one of the things that the EU did as part of this biodiversity strategy was to do a thorough analysis of where biodiversity had got to. And the conclusions they came to don't sound very good. Ecosystem degradation is continuing. Biodiversity loss is continuing. So they concluded that the current protection law is simply not enough. They need more legislation, and the voluntary targets that they'd put in the biodiversity strategy, the previous biodiversity strategy, were simply not working. So the idea of putting their previous plan to put forward good ideas and hope that those good ideas would somehow be adopted by all the countries across Europe wasn't working. So the conclusion that the EU came to was that they would propose a new law with legally binding targets for nature restoration. So they didn't want to go back and change the Habitats Directive because they didn't want to reopen all the discussion about that. They said, no, it's not working well enough. We need something in addition to the Habitats Directive. And that's happened really quite recently. In June of this year, the EU has proposed a new nature restoration law, which will be an EU regulation. And in there it says that by 2030, restoration measures will cover 20% of EU land and sea, that member states will reverse the decline of pollinator populations by 2030, and that member states will monitor pollinator populations and produce a grasslands butterfly index for their country every year. So if you're not doing it, do it. And you might guess this is fairly controversial. So this is a Commission proposal, but it's something they've been working on for quite a long time, and they are now wanting to get this through as EU law. So it's going through an approval process to the EU, to the European Parliament, and to the not the Commission, European Parliament, and the Council and the European Council to get approval. And some countries and some pressure groups are objecting to some parts of it. People don't like the reduction in pesticide use if your business is making pesticides. But at the moment, that proposal is going through an approval process. And a key feature of it is that member states must send, once it's brought into force, which might be next year or early the year after, member states must send the Commission a nature restoration plan within 2 years. So within 2 years of it coming into force, each member state will have to produce a nature restoration plan, which will be checked by the EU to make sure that it's good enough, and it will then be published. So the EU is getting really quite serious about wanting member states to actually get on and do something, and do the right things. So I just finished with 2 slides to talk about priorities for the future. So the priorities for us in Butterfly Conservation Europe are obviously to complete the Spring project by October next year and make sure that that project is a success. We're also very worried about the funding because we've just had 2 projects and we want some funding to continue after 2023 as well. So we're working on that. Very important for us to support those 15 new butterfly monitoring schemes in those countries. Those schemes are quite small at the moment. We're relying on 1 or 2 national coordinators to keep those schemes running. We need to build those, make them more robust and more resilient so that they work in the future. And we're continuing to provide policy advice to the European Commission on the biodiversity strategy for 2030 and on getting this nature restoration law through the European Parliament and the Council. And we're already seeing some member states, some industrial pressure groups, some farming groups complaining that they don't like what's in the proposed nature restoration law. And the answer is, you're not supposed to like it. You're supposed to change what you're doing and get on with it. So that message will take some time to get through, I think. And I thought I'd finish by being perhaps a little bit provocative and suggest some priorities for you as the butterfly experts in Austria, Czechia, Poland, and in other member states as well. Obviously, you need to complete your Apollo project. You've got until 2028. It's a nice long project, so you've got time to work on it and need to make that a success. I'd also ask you all to think about supporting the new butterfly monitoring schemes in your own countries and seeing how you can help those to grow and become more successful. And I think there's an important role for you to provide advice to your government on implementing the biodiversity strategy and this new nature restoration law that's coming through. And I'll leave you with a question, which is, what do you want your government to put into its nature restoration plan to improve butterfly habitats? And if your national government has to produce a plan in the next 2 to 3 years, I don't think there'll be very many people in your environment ministry who have a really good idea of what's happening on the ground. So maybe you need to start giving them some advice about what to put in that plan. What do you want in that plan to restore nature in your region, in your country, in your national park? So I'll leave you with that as a thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's indeed a very important questions, and I hope we as a team will be able, at least to some extent, fulfill, because those are also our tasks and our aims, definitely. Do we have any questions? Okay. Hello?
No.
See?
No. No.
Okay, now. It's very interesting. I wanted to ask you if you had any advice on how to mediate with policymakers, because as you said, could be quite difficult to get through to legislators coming from the EU, maybe speaking to scientists, and then coming back to state members. So sometimes just going with a tough face, it's more detrimental than beneficial. So do you have any advice for a way to mediate and to ease these kind of policies into politicians that might be very difficult to receive them?
I think the experience we've seen through Butterfly Conservation Europe is very much that you need to make the contacts and you need to get to know the right people. I've been working in the policy area for about 3 years since I've retired. But Sue Collins, who is the other policy advisor, has been talking to the Commission for probably the last 15 years and gradually developing relationships, developing trust, getting people to understand the science and to believe in the science, in the results that you're putting forward. So it does take time to develop, and maybe to some extent you need somebody who's familiar with EU policy. In my previous job, I worked for the Commission for 2 years in Seville, so I've got a fairly good idea of how the Commission works and how the Commission thinks, and that's useful. And so you have to, as with any communication, you have to think about your audience. So you have to talk to the Commission in the way that the Commission wants you to talk to them. So it's no good putting forward a national view. The Commission doesn't want to talk to Vlinderstichting, the butterfly conservation group in the Netherlands. It doesn't want to talk to the German or the Swedish butterfly conservation organization. It wants to talk to one person. So it wants to talk to Butterfly Conservation Europe, because then it can have a European view. And that's the way it works. So if Butterfly Conservation Europe hadn't been set up, we wouldn't have made any of these changes, because the Commission just wouldn't have had a group to talk to. And so you've got to think of how you do that. Now, on a national level, you've got to think about what's the right way to talk to your ministry, to get your ministry to start to listen to the things that you're doing. And that can be quite difficult, but you've got to start to build those relationships, talk to them in their terms. Think about what drives politicians. And what drives politicians is, firstly, complying with the law. And if the EU is really keen on something, they're going to start to listen. But also to, what are the wider implications? And one of the benefits I think you see in the countries that have large butterfly monitoring schemes is that the politicians can see that people are really interested in butterflies, that there is a lot. So the data is good, and the data is important, but also the fact that there are lots of people involved in doing it is of interest to politicians, because they've always got lots of people who want to talk about their specialist subject. But if it's something that's of interest to the population at large, then they think it's probably got votes attached to it, and that makes politicians think. So money and votes, to make the politicians interested.
Eden, if I can add something to this, you also need to understand what you're talking about. If you look at that EU regulation on nature restoration, learn those 73 pages inside out. And then you have to play the good guy, bad guy game. If you're talking to the politicians, it cannot be you talking to the press. So you need somebody that will then take that restoration regulation and really get it out into the public. Because what we have found out, that most people don't even know what's in that regulation. And this implies, we always think that the legislators, the politicians know these things. Well, we found out, and remember, we are dealing with the wolf and livestock predation. Most people don't understand what Article 16 is, what Article 12 is. They don't. They issue wolf killing orders, and they are just illegally the way that they are worded. Why? Because they don't really, it's a politician who's not a lawyer. So an additional advice on all this is learn your stuff, learn it inside out, become knowledgeable, learn everything you can, and then also team up with others who get the votes, who get it out that the politician says, maybe I should talk to the lady in the yellow coat because she knows her stuff.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Just one last question for this session.
Hello, I'd like to add a comment. In October this year will be opened a road in the Lubuskie Voivodeship, which was built along the Nature 2000 site. And the authors of the report of the impact of the investigation on the habitats stated that there is one line about butterflies, that there's no worth of concern butterflies. And that's all about butterflies. So I wrote to the local governors that I live just near the road, next to the forest, and on my private area I indicated 5 at least protected butterflies. But in exchange I was asked for whom I did the observations, how much cash I got for such activity, and that I'm obligated to provide the office with photographs, with dates of the days when I took the photos. So the road will be opened in October this year. Mm-hmm. So there were many mistakes in the report. So I think that's the problem on the larger scale, because it's not only the local governors, it's not only the ministry, but also the UE, because they accept such reports.
Yeah.
And they just let us do it. Thank you.
Yeah. I would agree. I think you have to be. I think it's one of the things they say about a general during a war, isn't it? You have to be prepared to lose some of the battles to win the war, and you have to learn from the mistakes and the things you haven't done well enough to see what will work better. And when you look at something like butterfly monitoring, it's the long data set. It's the good quality science that matters, because it's not just one recent research paper that looks at something. It's having that depth of knowledge. But the problem is it's a rather long game, and I'm not sure we have the luxury of a long enough time to implement it. We need to get on with doing things much more quickly, because climate change is catching up with us, and you only need to look at the drought and the forest fires this summer to realise that we need to get on and do things quickly.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm really very pleased that the discussion is so eager, and we would like to discuss, but yeah, again, the agenda is running. So I would like to thank you, Adrian, for your comments in the presentation, and David and Zdenek for presentation about the habitat management. So the Czech Czech experiences. Yeah, great.
Okay, can I just sit somehow? It doesn't work. I hope I didn't break it. Well, is it okay? Dziękuję bardzo. So, hello everybody. We would like to to introduce you the habitat problem with the Parnasius Apollo, and we will start from very broad information, and slowly we will focus more and more to the topic we would like to say, and we will end with a specific example of what should be done and how difficult it is to keep Parnasius Apollo in the landscape. So first of all, here is David Číp, and who is just responsible for Czech part involved in this Live Apollo, and I'm here in double agent, because I work as a researcher in the institute under Academy of Science as a researcher, and here I have a side job as a translator. So first of all, we have to remind you that the diversity and biodiversity in Europe is a result also of diversity of the habitats. If we follow the classical climax theory, then everywhere here should be just only closed forests and nothing else, but it has never really been true because of many factors. So And is this really also not surprised that majority of our species, or at least of butterfly species, are they live in open landscape and not in closed forest. We have just a single species which is able to single species of butterfly and some species of moth which are able to survive in closed forest, but the majority is really in very diverse mosaics of any kind of the habitat. And what were the main factors responsible for the very rich mosaic of different habitats? Since the start, there are some biotic and abiotic factors influencing this, and I will go just slowly, but not in huge in details in every of that factors, and then what we should do with that. So the abiotic factors are the things which are really not well managed by the biota, but they are just happening, not itself, but they are still happening. And such problems are, some factors are, for instance, the avalanches, which are very important in mountains, just to keeping the mountain tops, and not only the tops, with the treeless vegetation. Because what the avalanche is doing is just push the huge mass of snow and through the forest, and just making the corridors for the open habitat fauna between upper and lower zone. Otherwise, it will be completely isolated, and so the avalanches are good for making of the migratory habitats. Then there are also glaciers, which are also keeping the frozen land, and they are also keeping very different kinds of habitats. You see that almost nothing is living there, but still this is very important for many of biota. And then we have also some problems, like we have some barriers to keep the avalanches, because unfortunately people don't like much the avalanches especially if they are living aside or if they are doing some winter sports. And we have also disappearing glaciers because of the thawing of the ice and because of the climate change. But on the other hand, it also exposed the land which was covered by the ice, and now we have some very nice open habitats there. And another very important factor are the wildfires. We are very afraid of them because they are so dangerous to human population and so on. But what the fires are doing, they are keeping huge diversity of habitats. And still, we see it as disaster, but this is not really true, because there are many species of insects, fungi, plants, which are pyrophytes. They can't survive for a longer time without the fires. And you see that even in such habitats, you see the dry, burned trees, but under the trees there is still some understory which is completely green and full of life. And here is very special combination of two elements, of water and fire together. You see the orange sky. This is full of dust and ash from forest fires. Then you see the dry remnants of the forest, which were again taken by fire. And then you see the green trees surviving the fires with no problems. Then you see that even there in the river there are some pieces of forests which are there for a longer time, and the river just makes the barrier for the fires. And so this really is making some huge mosaic of treeless vegetation, and it was so even a long time without any human presence. And if you see what are doing the rivers, this is also amazing. The unregulated rivers with all that floods and everything, they are very important in making of huge variety of different habitats. Even if we like it or don't like it, they will not ask us. And if you see this from up, then you see that the river body is really interesting set of different kinds of habitats, of open gravel, open sand, then some shrubland, some pieces of woodlands, and this is difficult to keep such diversity anymore. What we did to this, we just stopped the avalanches in many cases, and we are stopping this water element to make these huge damages, just keeping the water in such kinds of corridors, in concrete channels. Even here you see that there is some vegetation inside, but really this is not comparable in what are doing the white rivers. Then we have some biotic factors, and here's which are going with the combination, like forest fires and then we have third element, the wind. Again, wind is what is doing. It just is opening in very large scale, is opening the forest. The trees are falling down, then they will be very important food for all the invertebrates, fungi. They will make the space for another trees. So you see that the forest is cut down by the wind. But there are a huge amount of very small trees which are regenerating. So this is really not end of the forest. This is just new life put into the forest. And then we have some biotic factors. Bark beetle calamities. They are doing the same things like the fire, like the winds. They are opening the canopy and putting the light into the substrate. And again, this is very important thing for not only for the insects, but also for many birds and many other even large animals, but also many of other kinds of biodiversity. And then there is huge effects of large herbivores. But unfortunately, we lost a huge amount of this diversity because of our ancestors. But still, since the time, the effects of the large herbivores did not stop. So currently, the large herbivores, there are many kinds of them, and they have different impact of the landscape. So browsers are doing something else than intermediate feeders and grazers. And if you just have only one kind of the herbivores, it will not help you. You have to have the wide variety of the herbivores to manage the land. That it will have all that kinds of different mosaic of habitats. Unfortunately, we lost already the mammoths and woolly rhinos, who were probably very good in keeping the land out of the impenetrable shrubs. But at least something. Now many of that species are extinct, but we can still surrogate the extinct species with quite closely related domestic breeds like these Exmoor horses, or regenerated aurochs, which they are probably quite similar to the extinct ones. But for sure they are having this very similar impact, despite of their origin in primitive cattle. Then we still have the European bisons, thanks to the Polish and Belarusian enclosures. But, well, it's difficult to call that animals wild because it was kept in these enclosures for a very longer time. But we are happy that they are also managing the land. But if they itself will not help, because important is to have the combination of different kinds of the herbivores. So every species is doing something else, and only together they can somehow manage the land. We have also some other species of herbivores which are still present, and some of them were already extinct. For instance, beaver was extinct for several centuries in Czech Republic. Now they returned. The people are upset because what do the beavers? They cut the trees, but on the other hand, they are also returning the water to many kinds of habitats which were dry out. So the effect of the beavers is really interesting and important. We have also some moose, which are not really effective because there are only a few of them. So they are really not much effective in keeping the biodiversity, but still they have very huge impacts on the regeneration of coniferous forests, that they are just eating the small seedlings, and then they are also doing some management in other type of habitats. And then we have also red deer, which are not endangered in our country, but many populations are closed in winters to enclosures. So the enclosures are overgrazed, On the other hand, this red deer will be very, very important to have outside, because then what they will do, they will also make the forest structure more open. And then there is this Capricorn, which we don't have in Czech Republic, but we believe that this really should have been, because we are completely missing any herbivore, mega herbivore in our high mountains, like in Krkonoše or Karkonoše in Polish, like in our Outwater and other. So our upper zone, or our zone just above the trees, is not managed at all currently by anything. And then the huge abiotic factors were just the Homo sapiens and all the others, and subspecies like Neanderthals and so, because they wiped out the large megafauna almost to zero, keeping only few species, but they replaced it by other management, like slash and burn things, and what they were, and what our ancestors did, they just kept this mosaic of different habitats, even without the large herbivores, just using the small crop fields, pastures, and forest pastures, and combination of everything. So they were doing different things. They were using different tools, but still they kept the landscape open. So there are some examples of fur pasture and this traditional landscape, which you think is beautiful. We think that it is beautiful. If you see at old paintings, and you see that even the people in several centuries ago, they were seeing this landscape as the interesting one. And our species were what is surviving now. They still are remnants of that kind of traditional management, which were keeping the original structure and mosaic of different kinds of habitats. So why we are facing this huge loss of the diversity? This is because of complete change of agriculture and forestry. Even not only in West Europe, but in East Europe, and especially in Czech Republic and in some other, in Eastern Germany and other parts of that eastern zone. The agriculture was getting very, very intensive. The government was fighting against small-scale farmers. They did this collectivization, just grabbing all the cattle, all the crop fields, everything, and just making very intensive and very sterile landscape. They put the cows into houses just to keep them, then they put the manure just outside, just in the industrial way. And what we see now, that in such very uniform landscape, there's almost nothing. Well, what kind of diversity can be there? How many species of butterflies you can find in such habitat? Just very, very few, and not in the middle of such crop fields. So to conserve back and to conserve last remnants of landscape, of those places with butterflies, with moths, with bees, with bumblebees, with beetles, with flowers, is very difficult, and now is getting very expensive. Because who will now manage the habitats by hand? Who wants to work by hand? Because, well, what we need is just to get some money, to get the salary, to enjoy the life, to watch the movies, and anything else. But who will have time just to mow the meadow and get almost nothing at this, and who will be living almost from nothing at this? So there is no way to keep this traditional type of living, unfortunately. Maybe we need, well, and nobody of us wants to go back to the time when everybody is poor and we have to care only about the bread and nothing else. So we have to invent plenty of new tools, like using the chainsaw instead of axes, and then we need plenty of volunteers to keep the land. Then we have to do plenty of experiments using different kinds and different breeds of sheep and cattle, and because even the different breeds of the domestic animals behave a bit differently to the landscape. And we also try to regenerate the habitat that no action of us will be required, like this rewilding movement. And this is really not getting very difficult to keep in large areas without anything. So we tried to put some Exmoor ponies to some abandoned land, like the former military training ranges, and we even tried to do the artificial fires and to see the effects on. And it's good when it doesn't escape much. But of course, we have to pay attention. Then we have also, there are many cases that you can't use the pasture because you don't have enough cattle to do this, or the places are too small. So it's very nice to make a human pasture, that you will just follow you will just mark some trace, and the tourists go there and they will do all the necessary trampling instead of the cattle. You don't need this. This has also a huge advantage because you don't need to feed the tourists. You only need to persuade them that there is some funny activity they should enjoy, like these airplanes or other things. And you can smile, but this is really very effective, efficient method. And it costs almost nothing, just only to make some advertisements and put some trees. And then, this is very important. This is in the highest elevations of Altvater or Jeseniki mountains, and where the people were believed that without any management, that this is the high alpine mountain grasslands were survived by their own. They were not. There are huge vegetation changes. So even here, without the introduction of some management, it will be impossible to keep such high alpine mountains anymore. And here there are some trials how to improve the management just using some other tools. Unfortunately, not all these were not successful, because here, using that machine, it was so much dusty that it was impossible to work, and the amount of, well, how was it? Not really successful. Then just to use the ordinary car to open the ground, which was also not really great, because the car did it well, but then it was completely broken and you couldn't use the car. So it was a very expensive kind of management. Then you can using different kind of other machines, but it was again very difficult and also quite expensive in the sense of fuel and human effort. This kind of management is very well, but if you see all the activities like Green Deal and all the concerns about the fuel and about this, so now they are doing the Russians are going very well. The management in eastern Ukraine, unfortunately, don't care much about the original population, but it would be really interesting to make a research on butterfly fauna there. Unfortunately, I'm afraid that they will not let us do this research. Another kind of this very good vehicle is this one, but again, the fuel consumption is too high to make it everywhere. So now we slowly move to Parnassus Apollo. Here, this is Vršatec. It's a hill in Bielé Karpaty. White Carpathians is on Slovakian side, only a few kilometers from Czech border. Unfortunately, in Czech side we don't have such calcareous rocks. And here you see see how overgrown is that rocky outcrop, that there is in reality not much space for that species, for Apollo. So even here it was important to make management just to clean the rocks, to get the shrubs out of this. You see that a huge amount of volunteers is needed for such small locality to keep the locality. And very difficult is also to wipe out the shrub, but it's almost almost impossible, because when you cut it, it regenerates very quickly. So you have to use either pesticides, but the problem is that majority of the pesticides are already banned in EU because they are not really good and healthy. Then you need plenty of effort to keep the grasslands open and to hay the meadows. And what is quite important and interesting is the winter pasture. If you use the sheep in the winter, where there's almost nothing to eat, they will just start to eat the shrub. And this is the only method how to get the shrub not regenerating. Because if you do anything with the shrub in the season, there will be much more shrub just very, very soon. So if you want to have something like this, you can't do this in summer. You have to apply the winter pasture, or you have to use the pesticides. So thank you very much for your attention, and we are open to any kind of questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Oh, we can. Okay. So Max, again, this one as himself, not as Otto, talking about the new phases of traditional mowing techniques.
May I ask you all to raise your hand, please? Everybody just raise the hand. Everybody, please. I'm going to take a photo and send my kids. You voted that this is the best presentation today. Thank you. Well, you know, kids always ask, where are you going? Why you're going there? Stay home, please. I don't have such nice pictures, but I will talk a little bit about how we could use our knowledge to influence, maybe even on a large scale, the survivability of insects. Because as my colleague just alluded to you, we had a big change in technology, especially in the agricultural technology, in the last 20, 30 years. And it's no surprise that the insects in general, not just the Parnassius, but all insects, in the same period declined. And one of them is obviously the meadow itself. That's where those insects and amphibians live. And over the years, we used the sickle and other manual tools, and insects were able to escape our ways of dealing with those meadows. Now, surprisingly, we always look at meadows out in nature, but when you look at the German road system, there are 6,800 kilometers of meadows left and right of every road, which actually is only mowed once a year. So you would think there's insects in there. No, because we also changed technology. And what did we use? What are the traditional mechanical tools that we're using? Well, this one is actually one that is fairly good if we are dealing with the survivability of any kind of insects and amphibians. Why? Well, it is a very slow machine. It is cutting at the minimum of 8 centimeters, so everything that's below it can survive. Well, because of, we need more money, we need to increase our profits, we introduced these rotary mowers. Everybody knows them. Where with that kind of technology, the insect's death has died. And it's amazing when you look at the legal requirements of hay, it says that you're allowed to have up to 10% ash in hay. What's the word ash? It in reality means dead animals. So you're allowed to make hay with 10% dead animals in them. And then this is what we are now lately using, and you see them everywhere in every village, everywhere, is those mulchers. And those mulchers are the ultimate nuclear bomb when it comes to our insects and amphibians. And I will quickly go through them with you. This kind of cutter bar mowers, they were replaced because they are technology, and you remember the old tractors, they had them on the side and you lowered them. The speed is slow. And if you have an uneven ground, those rotating knives quickly go into the ground. So what did the farmers do? They raised the knives. But with that, the animals were able to survive. The rotary mower in itself doesn't look so deadly, but it creates an undersuction. It literally sucks the grass up so that it can cut it. But by doing that, it sucks all of the amphibians, the eggs, the caterpillars, everything into those high-speed rotating knives. And this thing, and then even worse, not only does it suck them up, but it goes into this second machinery, which then, whatever survived the first step, literally gets killed in the second one. And the last step in all of that process is then these plastic silage things, because once the insect survived this and this step, it suddenly gets trapped into a plastic condom that we use because it is just easier. Here are some numbers to show you what the impact is. We have the bottom surface Phalaenus, the Herbaceous Phalaenus, and the floral one. The power bar, yes, it also kills animals, no doubt, in insects. But the numbers immediately increase because you're then starting to use a tractor, which has higher speed. You're suddenly, before there were no grasshoppers because they were able to jump away. The moment you have a high-speed tractor, the grasshopper can't find its way out of this thing anymore. And the numbers go all the way up with the conditioner to incredible numbers, which means that 62% of the fauna in such a field use such a high-speed rotating mower actually does not survive the mowing process. And this is not even taking into account yet the mowing timing, because you obviously should cut later in the process so that those caterpillars have turned into butterflies. And we have seen that in the Apollo, it's sometimes all the way into July. But as we need to make a lot of hay, we sometimes start cutting already at the beginning or end of May. And those mulchers, like I said, are the ultimate death. Now, every community is using them. And that's where we could start to lobby. Why are you using them? Go back to the old system. And not only do we have the problem now that they kill the insects, but those mulchers leave the biomass on the grass. And what that causes is, it's lying there, but all of those more or less weaker kind of plants can't make it through it anymore. So you're actually limiting the biodiversity by leaving the biomass on the field instead of removing it. And remember, many of those species are existing because we modified the landscape over thousands of years through agricultural. But we never left the hay lying on the grass because we needed them in our farms. Well, today, hay doesn't really have a price anymore because we are importing soy out of Argentina and I don't know what else. So the death is not just during the mowing process, but also during the scattering, turning, windrowing, and loading. So basically the animal has got 5 ways of getting killed, the insects, all the way through it. The butterflies, that's really the loss of the caterpillars and pupae, because that's where, during the rotary, they get sucked up and literally eliminated. But the caterpillars are slow. They can't get away when they hear the tractor coming. The danger is especially that they leave the material out there, and silage can endanger an entire population. So if you cut the grass with that high technology and then you silage, there is literally the whole population stuck in a plastic bag. How can you do it insect friendly? Use a wide working range. Why? The wider it is, the less the tractor itself kills the animals. Staggered management. I will show you on what that means. Mowing area inside out. So not just plow through the field, but actually drive in the way that these insects, and especially amphibians and even mice, can leave the area. And that, again, is the reason why you should slow down the speed. But that is opposite to what now farmers need to do because of the price pressure that we have in the market. I mean, a liter of milk is so cheap that they need to increase the speed of harvesting, otherwise they cannot make a profit. So it's again the consumer who actually is instrumental in killing our butterflies and insects. So here are some ideas on what you can do on mowing. Go in circles, inside out, so that they can leave. And remember, it's not just insects. There's many animals in such a field, okay? And even here, one strip, another strip, and another strip, and then you cut the next one a couple of weeks later, so that the insects can go from one strip to the next one, because obviously that helps them. Don't use these conditioners. Don't use the vacuum mowers. The cutting height must at least be 8 centimeters. And that's about that much. And when you see such a field with the rotary disc mowers, you often see that they even cut into the ground, because those things, they don't, they're sharp enough that they can literally cut the top of the grass away, which, looking at climate change, is a bigger problem, because if you leave the grass standing for 8 centimeters and the sun burns down, the insects below it are not subject to the intense heat of the sun. They have shade. And last but not least, for the farmer, the meadow itself doesn't dry out. So the closer we cut to maximum the amount of hay, the worse we make our field for drought. So it would be obvious what to do, but it's not obviously, because it's all about the money. And I don't fault the farmers for this. To be very clear, farmers do what they're forced to do, not what they would like to do. And that's the big issue that we have in all of this discussion about nature conservation. If they would get more money for their product, they would most likely use this technology. And I give you an example how that works. Yes, we can use the sheep and the goats. We are doing that in Livestock Protect. But even there, we have now the wolf returning, we have the lynx returning, we need more shepherds, and shepherds should not be paid as uneducated, lower echelon employee. In reality, these are the biodiversity managers of the future. So a shepherd today in our projects, they get 3,000 euros a month, because that's what they are worth for the biodiversity. So we should also look in all of these policy discussions, not just we need a shepherd, but we actually need people that understand the biodiversity in the ecosystems and then adapt the technology, the tools, everything else to the whole life cycle of the meadow. And that means a totally new job description for jobs that we've had for thousands of years. That this works is a good example. Bioland in Germany, which is the largest organic farming association, and now Austria is doing the same thing. They have introduced to their members, which are all farmers, a point system. And you need 100 points to be accepted within the Organic Farming Association. And those points are given to the farmers. If they go to the cross-cutting knife system, do not use rotary. If they are staggering the way that they're cutting the grass, if they're cutting later in the season. So actually, there are farming associations out there. And BIA Austria, just one province, has got 16,000 members who are now changing the way that they are managing the fields. But it comes from within, and we need to support this from outside by giving them money that they need to protect our biodiversity. I didn't have nice pictures, though.
Thank you very much. Is there any questions? Are there any questions? Okay.
There's one.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Já budu mluvit česky, omlouvám se.
I will speak in Czech. I'd like to ask a question to you, because you could see the problem with this disturbance. So this rotary cutter might be a benefit because we move a layer of soil, and these places are places where butterflies go through vast stages of development. So mowing grass may involve rotary cutters, but what is of key importance is that this interference happens at the right place in space and in time. We do not mow the whole meadow at the same time, and we are trying to cut the grass in such a way that we support flowering, blooming species, and we do mowing of parts of the whole meadow. And even though some insects die, if you do it step by step, and if you do it in a reasonable way, you never mow the whole meadow at once. There is a nice saying, to mow a meadow is cruel, but not mowing a meadow may be also cruel. So first, it may be cruel for one species, for an individual, but if you don't mow it at all, it may be cruel for the whole population. Yes, if you have these bars, they tend to break down more often. So rotary device is okay, but let's be reasonable.
Okay. Did you understand or not? No. Okay, but are you managed to comment on that, or shall we translate?
I heard the last comments about not mowing versus mowing.
Okay, I can. Sure. It was mostly that your presentation was very nice to show that in large scale this is much better to use this finger mover than these rotation ones. But in some large scale, sometimes you need to put the just to expose the ground and just to keep the vegetation out and just to press it somehow. So in some special cases, it is much better to use that rotation things. But but it's important to make it in small scale and just to think where to do it, because of course the animals will die there. But in some cases, this is much better to kill a few individuals, but to save the population.
I think we're going to have a beer together, because the technology is not anymore, when we're talking about the knives that we had 50 years ago. I have a picture with me that today's are up to 16 meters wide. So you could use this insect-friendly technology in a highly productive environment. But it means support, it means education, and it means public pressure. So I would like to say, let's not kill anything anymore because we got nothing left. The reality is it will take some time, because those rotary disc mowers are just out there everywhere. And when you go through here, you look at those whippersnippers, every piece of grass gets mowed, and sometimes I ask myself, are they just mowing for the sense of mowing? Because that is also a part of the issue. And yes, it may take a little bit of going from one extreme where we mow everything to another extreme where we use this technology, and sometime we will end up in the middle. And my proposal is, let's try to get those high-speed mowers out of business, return to a modernized version of the new technology, and there will be instances where we need to even use the mulchers. But that should be the exception. And at the moment, that's the norm and not the exception. And we have a beer.
As we have a little bit, still a few minutes before the lunch break, I was requested by Dusan Sasha from Czech Republic if he could have some words about the population ecology, just few slides. So yeah, unexpectedly, we will have just a few slides from Mr. Dusan.
First, can you hear me? Okay. So some clearing. My name is Dusan Šácha, and I'm from Slovakia, but otherwise it was all good and well. What I managed to smuggle in the program is a presentation about population ecology of Parnasius apollo butterfly. And it is from the monitoring scheme that we ran, it's already 5 years ago in Vršatec. Before I speak, you can choose the language, if I continue in English or should I do it in Slovak?
If I may say anything, English, please.
English, all right. So then, please, when I have to finish, just give me a sign so that I don't disturb the program. You know the butterfly, so we will just run through this. This is the area which is this. These squares, it's where our protected landscapes, Biele Karpaty and Bílé Karpaty on the Czech side meet. And it's Vršatec mountain where this population lives. And we had 9 sites there where we monitored the butterfly. And you can see how they were distributed here. Well, it was 10 sites. This is distances between the sites. So we had some sites that were very neighboring, close by to one another. And also we had some sites that were 5 kilometers away. So what we wanted to do is to dig some information, because usually what was done with butterflies was that people catch them and did some writing on the wings so as to protect them from smugglers. And I got the idea that we should dig some more information from the process. So what we did was we used capture-recapture method, and this is how what we write on the wings. This is the site, and this is the number. And you go there once in 2 or 3 days in the whole season, and you count the butterflies and you write on them and make these marks, and so then you statistically evaluate the results. So what we got was 1,200 individuals that were marked, and as you can see, there were 3 and something males on 1 female in total. This is the breakdown according to the sites. And then we were able to count the process of emergence. So we see that the emergence started in half June. It peaked a week or 10 days later, and then the last one flew, I thought it was early August. But we were able also to break it down according to sexes. And as you can see, red are males and green are females. So males started sooner, probably a week sooner, and they also peaked sooner. And this is, I was very happy to hear from your breeding site that you had the same in the artificial breeding process. That really this was not artifact of the method, but we discovered how it goes in nature. So this is for males, and this is for females. Females emerge for longer, like males are faster. In this, they peak at a bigger maximum, and females are more prolonged in the season. This is the chart that shows how often we were able to catch one individual. So most of them we got only once. It was about the half. And then only one was caught 8 times. And again, more males than females. So this is in charts. Then we were asking about how long this butterfly can live. And we had, you can see, this is, how to say, this is what percentage or how many individuals lived up to the day number 1 to 25. And you can see that the recorders lived for 3 weeks. This is percentage of individuals that were surviving to the concrete day. So probably half was registered only once. And then you'll see that for probably 2 weeks, this is the threshold that then these butterflies were registered, so to say, no more. And this is, again, breakdown for males and females. And you can see that males were, so to say, more successful in it. Now, there is a question whether life length depends on the time in the season when the individual emerges. And this is, we used various statistical figures. This is average, median, modus, and maximum. And as you can see, most long-lived butterflies hatched during the first couple of days in the season. This green and red means it is only for statistical reasons. Where it is green, it's like on the traffic lights you can go. Where it is red, you have to stop and just put it from your mind. So, what's this? This is for left is males and right is females. So again, we can see that this duration, life duration is more variable in males than in females. This is the same, but for another statistical figures. So what we then were curious about was how many butterflies were on the spot in one particular day. And this is a chart that depicts it. So again, we had a peak of the population in late June. And how it looks when it breaks between males and females is here. So you can see that the population starts with only males, and then progressively it turns the ratio in favor of females, and very late in the season there are only females. And this is a chart that says that approximately half July, it is the day when the sexes are equal. Before half July, there were more males than females, and afterwards, there were more females than males. So this is a question. You are curious how far a butterfly can fly. And we were also able to count this number from our statistics. So most of them, you can see, almost 90% of butterflies stayed on their side, and only less than 10%, or more or less 10%, they were caught elsewhere. What it says is that this is the question whether butterfly that emerges early in the season and is therefore longer lived than animals that emerge later in the season, whether these are able to fly longer or not. And we found a very interesting thing, that this figure doesn't change very much. It is more or less stable, except maximum values. So recorders, you are more ready to expect in early season, but within the population, the trend is more or less the same during all the season. And what this says is that there is probably a very strong influence of so-called island theory. We have this Vršac mountain that is like an island in the landscape of forests, where these butterflies that are ready to fly far away, they just get lost and disappear from the population. So there is a pressure against this trade. So what it was all good for was that we wanted to know what is the structure of the population, in the sense if they communicate between each other. And we found that there are sites that communicate quite well. This is emigration, immigration. And there are also sites that are quite isolated. This is nothing important. This is a presentation that I had 5 years ago for my colleagues from State Nature Conservancy, so some of these slides are more important for them, not for you. What is important for us is that we found that there are 2 subpopulations, or 3, but the third subpopulation is more or less isolated one side. And then we can focus our conservation efforts on those sites, so to protect the butterflies and enhance communication between the populations. What you saw in Zdenek's and David's presentation, it was from our protected landscape, and I can tell you that just this weekend there was another part of this story. So they cleared new parts of the reservation. So I think this is it, what I wanted to say. One last sentence. You have a very good life finance project. And we heard about legislation, we heard about genetics, all good and well, but you have to know your object. You have to go to the nature and find out how it behaves, because then you are able to design the measures that you need to protect this butterfly. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, that was a very interesting comment to the previous panel. So thank you very much. Yeah, there are questions. Okay.
I have the few questions and few comments to your presentation. The first question is the population abundance value you have presented. There was the estimated population value or even the number of marked individuals. Yes, I mean this one.
This is calculated.
But which method?
Could you please speak to the microphone? Because of the translators, to the microphone, please.
We calculated it based on how much individuals were...
No, you know, but you marked individual. You have the number of marked individual.
Yeah.
And based of then, you may estimate the population abundance.
Yeah.
In which method? There are several very well-known methods. Which method you used?
This is not any estimate. I can show I can show you estimate. Estimate is in the end, but that
no, it's not estimation.
This is estimate.
Which method?
Craig index.
Craig index.
Yeah.
Okay. First, the second.
But estimate based on Craig index is somewhere between 1,500 and 3,000, or almost 4,000.
Yes, because Craig method based on the Poisson distribution, and it's informed about the confidence interval. Okay, the second one thing, you told about differences between abundance of male and female. In 2004, there was published a paper which showed that, in fact, these differences in field is at least in the big part the effect of differences in the detectability. Females are in fact not less abundant, but they are less visible because they are less active. Did you take into account this thing?
Yes, very good question.
It's not a question, it's information.
Very good point. And this is why I said that results from Karkonosze breeding station go in favor of our results from this research.
But you said that result for Karkonosze station confirmed the protandry, which is also the well-known about, it was written in 20s. So I am asking about the differences in the abundance of male and female.
Yes, and this is what I try to answer, is that if we observe in the field a weak lag between males and females in emergence, and they have it the same in the breeding station, in the conditions that are totally controlled, that means that the mistake
okay, but you are all the time talking about protandry, and I am asking about the sex ratio. So, if you see in the field 100 males and 13 females, in fact, it doesn't mean that sex ratio is made biased, because according to the publication which were published several years ago, it may be the 1-to-1, but the detectability make this bias in observation. So, did you take into account such facts or not?
Yes, I understand your point, but this is what I am trying to say. If we did the same mistake what you are talking about, we would observe difference between emergence of females and males differently, but this Karkonoše breeding station supports our observation.
But you are talking about protandry. I am talking about sex ratio.
Let's have it for a coffee break.
Okay, I think this is a very good point for the discussion, but maybe later on. Yeah?
I just would like to say, sorry to interrupt, that tomorrow there will be also space for scientific discussion in the morning, because it will be more suitable space, because here there are some people that are not scientific, so they are not involved in this one. But you will have a small group for that.
Okay, okay.
Maybe I missed it. I would like to ask you how many subpopulation did you study, and how far they from each other? How much isolated they are?
As you can see, we had those 10 sites, and within them we discovered that there are two subpopulations that include four. One includes 4 sites, one includes 3 sites, and there is just one isolated subpopulation then that stands very furthest away.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for this additional presentation. I would like to invite you for a lunch. Lunch is downstairs. The signs will guide you. I would also like to very kindly ask you to be here at 3 o'clock exactly, just for the sake of agenda and so we have